Stop pretending, my dad snapped as I gasped for air. My aunt claimed I was only trying to get out of chores. But when the EMT felt my pulse, he yelled for a stretcher, and suddenly the whole room broke into chaos. Can you imagine gasping for air, truly fighting for every single breath, while the people you love most stand over you, their faces twisted not with concern, but with cold, hard disbelief? My whole life, I'd been labeled the dramatic one, the girl who cried wolf. But on that 4th of July, as my lungs seized and my vision blurred and my own father snapped, "Quit faking it," something inside me didn't just break, it screamed betrayal. Growing up in the Marshall household, it was simple. Weakness was just not an option. My dad, Frank Marshall, he ran our home exactly like he ran his construction business, with ironclad expectations and zero room for any kind of excuse. He's 6 feet tall, with hands permanently calloused, and a voice that could carry clear across a busy worksite. Dad was just not the person you brought your complaints to. Unless, of course, you were really in the mood for a lecture about real problems. From my absolute earliest memories, anytime I felt even a little bit sick or got hurt, what I faced wasn't sympathy. It was skepticism. I remember I was 7 years old, and I'd broken my wrist falling from the big oak tree in our backyard. Dad made me wash the dishes first, before he finally took me to urgent care. He was absolutely convinced I was just exaggerating. The doctor, later, told him I was lucky there wasn't any permanent damage from the delay. That pattern, it just continued, right through my entire childhood. It was this constant, suffocating message that my pain didn't matter, that my experiences were less valid than everyone else's. My mom, she passed away when I was 4, leaving Dad to raise me and my younger sister, Jessica, all by himself. Maybe that explained his harshness, I don't know, but it never, ever excused it. Mom, she had been that essential buffer, you know? She stood between his stern pragmatism and our little childhood vulnerabilities. Without her, we were just completely exposed to his unfiltered judgment. Then there was Aunt Martha, his sister. She was cut from exactly the same cloth. A woman with perfectly maintained hair, who never showed up to any family gathering without a critical comment, always thinly disguised as concern. "Are you sure you should eat that, Abigail?" Or, "Well, that outfit is certainly a choice." After Mom died, she appointed herself my feminine role model. But her idea of guidance was pretty much just criticism, wrapped in the flimsiest veneer of helpfulness. The only person who ever truly believed me was Jessica. She's 3 years younger than me, and somehow, she managed to escape that dramatic label that had been plastered onto me. When I'd get migraines so bad they'd leave me vomiting in the bathroom, Jessica would silently bring me water and just sit with me in the dark. When Dad accused me of faking to get out of school, she would defend me in her own quiet way. Though, honestly, it rarely made any difference. By the time I was 16, I had internalized their dismissal so deeply that I actually started to doubt my own experiences. Maybe I really was being dramatic. Maybe normal people just didn't feel pain the way I did. So, I stopped mentioning when I felt unwell. I just pushed through fevers, through injuries, with this stubborn, grim determination. All that did, of course, was reinforce their belief that my previous complaints had simply been exaggerations. When I got accepted to State University, 300 miles away, it felt like a prison break. For 4 glorious years, I built a life where people took me at my word. My roommate, Elaine, she never questioned when I said I needed a quiet day because of a migraine. My professors, they granted extensions when I was genuinely sick. For the very first time, I experienced what it was like to be believed, to have my experiences validated instead of constantly dismissed. After graduation, I landed a job at a marketing firm in the city, and I vowed, absolutely vowed, never to move back home. I called on holidays, visited maybe twice a year, always with carefully planned exit strategies, and I built a life that was completely separate from the family that had made me doubt my own reality. Then came the economic downturn. Our firm lost 3 major clients in a single month. Being one of the newest hires, I was among the first let go. With student loans piling up and big city rent to pay, my savings just disappeared at an alarming rate. After 3 months of unsuccessful job hunting, I faced the unthinkable, moving back to my hometown. Dad offered the apartment above the garage rent-free until I got back on my feet. Jessica, who was now a nurse at the local hospital, seemed genuinely happy to have me closer. Even Aunt Martha made vague noises about connections at her country club who might be hiring. Swallowing my pride, every last bitter piece of it, I packed up my apartment and drove back to the place I had been so desperate to escape. The 4th of July celebration was an annual, ironclad tradition in our family. The Marshalls, along with an assortment of aunts, uncles, and cousins, would gather at our house for a barbecue before watching fireworks from our backyard, which overlooked the town park. This year, with me back home, Dad made it absolutely clear he expected me to take over the hosting duties. Those duties had once been my mother's, then had fallen to a rotating cast of female relatives after she died. "You live here now," he'd said, when I suggested Aunt Martha might want to handle the food, as she had for the past several years. "Time to pull your weight." So, I spent the entire week before the 4th of July cleaning the house, planning a menu, shopping for supplies, all while desperately continuing my increasingly futile job search. The pressure to create a perfect gathering weighed on me, heavy and suffocating. I knew any flaw would be attributed to my supposed incompetence, rather than the utterly impossible standards set for me. Little did I know that this family gathering would become a turning point, not just in how my family saw me, but in whether I would survive it all. The first sign that something was truly wrong came 3 days before the 4th. I woke up unusually tired, despite having slept for nearly 9 hours. My body felt heavy, like I was moving underwater, and just climbing the stairs to the kitchen left me completely winded. "You're out of shape," I told myself, repeating the words I'd heard from my father countless times. I ignored the strange fatigue and just focused on my endless to-do list for the upcoming family gathering. Later that afternoon, while vacuuming the living room, I had to stop twice just to catch my breath. A dull ache had settled deep in my right calf, but I dismissed it as a muscle strain from all the cleaning. I had spent years, literally years, learning to ignore my body's signals, to push through discomfort rather than risk being labeled dramatic. That evening, I called Elaine, my best friend from college. She'd become my lifeline since moving back home. "You sound terrible," she said, after I coughed my way through explaining my job search progress. "Thanks a lot," I laughed. Really trying, to ignore the strange tightness in my chest. "Just tired from cleaning. Dad wants this party to be perfect." "Your dad could hire cleaners with what he makes," Elaine pointed out, ever practical. "He just wants to keep you busy so you feel indebted." "Maybe," I admitted. "But what choice do I have right now?" "Just be careful, Abby," she said, her voice softening, a real concern there. "You know how you get when you're back there, ignoring when your body is telling you something is wrong." I promised her I would rest, but after we hung up, I stayed up until midnight prepping food for the party instead. The next morning, the fatigue was worse, a heavy shroud. I took a shower and had to sit down halfway through, suddenly lightheaded, my head spinning. Looking back now, I should have recognized these as blaring warning signs. But years of conditioning had taught me to doubt my own experiences, to assume I was overreacting. By July 3rd, the pain in my leg had intensified, joined by an occasional sharp, stabbing pain in my chest when I took a deep breath. I wrapped my calf in a bandage, took some over-the-counter pain relievers, and just continued with the preparations. The small, quiet voice in my head that suggested something might be seriously wrong was completely drowned out by the louder voice. The one that sounded remarkably like my father, calling me dramatic. The morning of the 4th, I woke up feeling decidedly off. My breathing seemed shallow, like I just couldn't quite fill my lungs completely. The simple act of getting dressed left me dizzy, the room tilting around me. Still, I had a party to host. The family would be arriving in just a few hours, and absolutely nothing was ready to my father's impossible standards. I pushed through the discomfort, setting up tables in the backyard, arranging chairs, hanging decorations. Each task took more effort than it should have, but I attributed it to stress and lack of sleep. By noon, I was moving in slow motion, every muscle protesting, but the backyard looked festive with red, white, and blue streamers and a table set for 16 people. Jessica arrived early to help, taking one look at me and frowning. "You look terrible, Abby. Are you feeling okay?" "Just tired," I said, the automatic response so ingrained, I didn't even consider an alternative answer. "Can you help me carry the coolers out?" As we lugged the heavy coolers, filled with ice and drinks, to the backyard, a sharp pain shot through my chest, so intense I nearly dropped my end. Jessica noticed my grimace. "Seriously, what is wrong?" she pressed, her eyes wide with worry. "Nothing." Pulled a muscle, probably. I forced a smile, ignoring the way my heart seemed to be racing, even though I was barely moving. The memory of the 8th grade science test suddenly flashed through my mind. I had woken up with a fever and begged to stay home. Dad had accused me of trying to avoid the test, forcing me to go to school, where I threw up in the middle of the exam. Even then, when the evidence of my illness was unmistakable, I had been scolded for making a scene. That day had taught me a powerful lesson about the futility of expressing pain in my family. By 2 o'clock, guests began arriving. Uncle Robert and Aunt Diane with their teenagers, Dad's cousin Patrick and his new wife. Grandmother Marshall, now 86, but still sharp as a tack. With each arrival, I plastered on a brighter smile, ignoring the increasing tightness in my chest and the strange tingling sensation in my fingers. Aunt Martha arrived last, as usual, making her grand entrance with a critical sweep of the decorations. "Well, you certainly went with a theme, didn't you?" she said, eyeing the patriotic decor I had spent hours arranging. Then she turned to me, her eyebrows rising. "Good heavens, Abigail, you look terrible. Are you trying to get attention again?" "Nice to see you, too, Aunt Martha," I said, my hands, which felt oddly numb, taking her casserole. "Everyone is in the backyard. You should put some color on your face before joining us," she advised, patting my cheek. "No one wants to look at someone who appears half dead at a party." The brutal irony of her words wouldn't hit me until much, much later. By the time we sat down to eat, I was really struggling to keep up the facade of normalcy. The simple act of breathing had become something I had to consciously focus on. Each inhale felt incomplete, like my lungs were filling with cotton instead of air. I picked at my food, unable to muster an appetite despite having skipped breakfast to finish the preparations. Dad noticed, of course. Nothing escaped his attention when it came to perceived failings. "After all the money I spent on food, you could at least eat it," he muttered as he passed the potato salad. I nodded and forced a forkful into my mouth, though swallowing felt like an enormous effort. Across the table, Jessica watched me with concerned eyes, but said nothing. She had learned, as I had, that challenging Dad in front of family only made things worse. The meal continued, conversation flowing around me as I concentrated on the increasingly difficult task of just breathing normally. No one else seemed to notice my struggle, or if they did, they chose to ignore it. Years of being told I was dramatic had effectively trained my family not to see my pain, even when it was written clearly on my face. As plates were cleared and dessert was served, the pressure in my chest intensified. A sharp, stabbing pain radiated through my right side, causing me to gasp audibly. A few heads turned in my direction, but quickly returned to their conversations when I forced a weak smile. "Bathroom," I murmured to no one in particular, rising unsteadily from my chair. In the downstairs bathroom, I gripped the edges of the sink and stared at my reflection. The face looking back at me was frightening. My lips had a bluish tinge. My skin was pale and clammy, and my eyes were wide with a fear I could no longer suppress. Something was very, very wrong. This wasn't stress or anxiety or any of the other things I had been telling myself. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to steady my racing heart. The pain in my chest came in waves now, each one more intense than the last. My breathing was becoming increasingly labored, each inhale shallower than the one before. "Get it together," I whispered to my reflection, repeating the mantra my father had used throughout my childhood. "Stop being dramatic." But my body was beyond responding to these ingrained commands. This was not something I could push through with willpower alone. I stayed in the bathroom for several minutes, trying to compose myself before returning to the backyard. The effort of walking those few steps left me dizzy and gasping. Dad caught my arm as I nearly stumbled back into my chair. "You okay?" he asked, but the question held more annoyance than genuine concern. "Fine," I managed, the lie automatic. As dessert concluded, Dad stood up, clapping his hands for attention. "All right, everyone. Jessica and Abigail will handle cleanup while the rest of us move to the front yard to set up for fireworks." Jessica started gathering plates, shooting me concerned glances as I remained seated, trying to summon the energy to stand again. The family dispersed, leaving us alone with the aftermath of the meal. I'll handle this, Jessica said quietly. You look like you're about to pass out. No, I insisted, forcing myself to stand. Dad will notice. In the kitchen, I began loading the dishwasher while Jessica scraped leftovers into containers. The simple action of bending down sent waves of dizziness through me. The kitchen lights seemed too bright, then too dim, my vision tunneling strangely. The stack of plates in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I tried to set them on the counter, but my arms just wouldn't cooperate. The crash of breaking dishes echoed through the kitchen as the plates slipped from my grasp and shattered on the tile floor. The noise brought my father storming back into the kitchen, his face dark with anger. What the hell, Abigail? Those were your mother's plates. I tried to explain, but my lungs seemed to seize. I couldn't draw enough air to form words. My hand went to my chest, pressing against the vice-like pain that had taken residence there. I can't breathe, I finally gasped, the words barely audible. Dad rolled his eyes, interpreting my physical distress as an emotional response to breaking the plates. Quit faking it, he snapped. Clean up this mess and get back to work. Aunt Martha appeared behind him, surveying the broken dishes with a look of pure disapproval. Really, Abigail, we all know you've always tried to get out of cleanup duty, but this is ridiculous. The edges of my vision began to darken as I struggled desperately for air. I reached for the counter to steady myself, knocking over a glass that joined the shattered plates on the floor. She's not faking it, Jessica said, her voice rising in alarm as she moved quickly to my side. Look at her. Something is really wrong. She's always been like this, Dad dismissed, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face as he took in my gasping form. Always making a scene. Uncle Robert stepped into the kitchen, drawn by the commotion. His expression shifted from curiosity to genuine concern as he saw me leaning heavily against the counter, my breathing rapid and shallow. Maybe we should call someone, he suggested, moving toward me. She's fine, Dad insisted, but his voice held less conviction now, less of its usual authority. She just needs to calm down. I can't breathe, I repeated, the words coming between desperate gasps for air. The room was spinning now, faces blurring together as my oxygen-starved brain struggled to process what was happening. My legs gave out and I slid down against the cabinets, landing amidst the broken dishes. The pain in my chest was overwhelming, radiating through my entire body. I could hear arguments happening above me, voices rising and falling, but they seemed distant, as if coming from another room. Enough, Jessica shouted, a sound so unexpected from my usually quiet sister that it momentarily silenced everyone. I'm calling 911. Look at her lips. They're blue. Don't you dare. Dad warned, his voice still authoritarian. But Jessica was already pulling out her phone, backing away when he moved to stop her. If you're wrong, you will never hear the end of this, Aunt Martha said, but there was undeniable fear in her voice now. I was beyond caring about their reactions. My entire focus had narrowed to the desperate, brutal struggle for air. Each breath was a battle I was losing. The kitchen ceiling tilted and swayed above me as I slumped further down, no longer able to hold myself upright. Through the gathering darkness, I heard Jessica's voice, steady and clear as she spoke to the emergency dispatcher. My sister cannot breathe. Yes, she is conscious, but barely. No previous heart or lung conditions that we know of. A new voice cut through the chaos. My grandmother, who had entered the kitchen unnoticed. Give her space, she commanded, and surprisingly, everyone listened. She knelt beside me with difficulty, her arthritic knees protesting, and took my hand. Help is coming, child, she said, the only one who seemed to fully grasp the true severity of the situation. Time became fluid, stretching and contracting unpredictably. I have no idea how long I lay there, fighting for each breath, before the piercing sound of sirens cut through the air. Heavy footsteps, unfamiliar voices, and then new faces appeared in my limited field of vision. EMTs in uniform, equipment being unpacked. Quick, professional questions directed at Jessica. A young male EMT knelt beside me, his face serious as he took my wrist, checking my pulse. His expression changed instantly, alarm completely replacing professional detachment. Get the stretcher in here now, he shouted to his partner. Pulse is 140 and thready, oxygen sats critically low. The room erupted in panic. My father stood frozen, his face ashen, as the reality of the situation finally penetrated his thick denial. Aunt Martha had backed against the wall, hand over her mouth. Jessica was openly crying, answering questions about my symptoms while grandmother held her shoulders. As the EMTs worked around me, attaching monitors and placing an oxygen mask over my face, I caught a glimpse of my father's expression. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes, and beneath that, the dawning horror of recognition. He had been wrong, catastrophically, dangerously wrong. The oxygen helped slightly, a small reprieve, but breathing remained a struggle. The EMTs spoke in urgent tones, using medical terminology I didn't fully understand. Words like cyanotic and tachycardic filtered through my fading consciousness. They lifted me onto the stretcher with careful efficiency. As they raised it to waist height, my vision narrowed to a pinpoint, the faces of my family receding into darkness as consciousness slipped away. The last thing I remember was the continued wail of sirens and the sensation of movement as they rushed me out of the house where I had never, ever been believed. Fragments of awareness came and went as I was loaded into the ambulance. The ceiling of the vehicle, bright lights moving across my field of vision. The comforting pressure of the oxygen mask on my face. The voices of the EMTs, urgent but controlled. BP is dropping, 70/40. Get another line in, possible P. Call ahead to the ER. Jessica was there, somehow, holding my hand, her face tear-streaked and terrified. Had they let her in the ambulance? I couldn't remember her getting in, but I was so profoundly grateful for her presence, a familiar anchor in the chaos. Hang on, Abby. Please hang on, she kept saying, her voice thick with fear. I tried to nod, to squeeze her hand, to give some indication that I heard her, but my body just wouldn't respond to my commands. The simple act of breathing consumed all my energy and focus. Each inhale was a battle. Each exhale a momentary relief before the struggle began again. Time lost all meaning. The ambulance ride could have been minutes or hours. The siren wailed overhead, the sound fading in and out as my consciousness ebbed and flowed. New faces appeared as the ambulance doors opened. More uniforms, more urgent voices. I was wheeled rapidly through automatic doors, fluorescent lights passing overhead in a dizzying blur. 25-year-old female, acute respiratory distress, tachycardic, hypotensive. The EMT rattled off information to the receiving medical team as they transferred me from the ambulance stretcher to a hospital gurney. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through my chest, and I must have made some sound of distress because Jessica squeezed my hand tighter. You have to wait here, someone told her as we reached a set of double doors. Her face crumpled, but she nodded, releasing my hand with obvious reluctance. I'll be right outside, Abby, she promised. I'm not going anywhere. Beyond those doors, the activity intensified. A doctor leaned over me, shining a light in my eyes, asking questions. I couldn't answer through the oxygen mask and my own breathlessness. Abigail, can you hear me? I'm Dr. Winters. We're going to take care of you. Monitors beeped, needles pricked my skin, and voices called out numbers and medical terms all around me. Through it all, the crushing pain in my chest and the desperate struggle for air continued. I need a chest CT stat and get ultrasound in here for her leg. Blood oxygen still dropping. Start her on heparin. We need to intubate if her SATs don't improve in the next 2 minutes. The urgency in their voices penetrated my fog of pain and fear. This was bad. Really bad. The realization should have terrified me, but a strange calm had settled over me instead. These people believed me. They saw my distress and responded with appropriate alarm. After a lifetime of having my pain dismissed, the validation was almost as powerful as the oxygen they were pumping into my failing lungs. Someone cut away my shirt, attaching leads to my chest. Cold gel was spread over my right leg, followed by the pressure of an ultrasound wand. The doctor watching the screen nodded grimly. DVT confirmed in the right leg. CT is ready for her. More movement, more lights passing overhead as I was wheeled down corridors. The CT scanner loomed above me, a massive, donut-shaped machine that would look into my chest and confirm what the medical team already suspected. Abigail, we need to take some pictures of your lungs, a technician explained. Try to hold as still as possible. The scan itself was quick, but the aftermath was a blur of increased activity. Words like massive pulmonary embolism and critical condition floated through the air around me. Back in the emergency room, new doctors appeared. Specialists called in for the crisis unfolding in my body. A mask was placed over my face, different from the oxygen mask, and a voice told me they needed to put me to sleep for a little while to help me breathe. Darkness claimed me before I could respond, a merciful escape from the pain and fear that had consumed my world. I have no memory of the next 12 hours. Jessica later told me that I was intubated, a tube placed down my throat to breathe for me when my own lungs couldn't keep up. Powerful blood thinners were administered to combat the clots that had traveled from my leg to my lungs. A special catheter was threaded through my veins to directly break up the largest clot that was threatening my life. My father arrived at the hospital 20 minutes after the ambulance, having followed in his truck with grandmother and Aunt Martha. He paced the waiting room, refusing to sit, refusing to speak. When the doctor came out to update the family, using words like life-threatening and critical condition, he had to brace himself against the wall. Aunt Martha left soon after, claiming the stress was too much for her heart. But everyone knew she was fleeing the evidence of her own culpability. Uncle Robert stayed, providing silent support to Jessica and making sure my father didn't collapse from the shock and stress. Throughout the night, as I lay unconscious in the ICU, my family waited. Jessica refused to leave, curling up in an uncomfortable chair in the waiting room when they wouldn't let her stay by my side. Grandmother Marshall, despite her age and arthritis, remained until dawn, quietly knitting and occasionally fixing my father with a look that spoke volumes about her thoughts on his behavior. The world returned slowly, in fragments and sensations. First, the steady beeping of monitors, then the antiseptic smell of hospital surroundings. Finally, the dull ache in my throat that indicated the breathing tube had been removed. I opened my eyes to a dimly lit hospital room. Jessica sat beside the bed, her head drooping in exhausted sleep, her hands still holding mine. The simple act of breathing was no longer a desperate struggle, though each inhale still caused a dull pain in my chest. My movement must have alerted her, because Jessica jerked awake, her eyes widening as they met mine. "Abby," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You're awake." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the intubation. Jessica quickly held a cup of water with a straw to my lips, helping me take small sips that soothed the burning sensation. "What happened?" I managed to rasp after a few moments. Jessica pressed the call button before answering. "You had blood clots in your lungs. Pulmonary embolism, they called it." "It was," she paused, swallowing hard. "It was really bad, Abby. They said if we had waited much longer to call the ambulance." She didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what she meant. I had nearly died on my father's kitchen floor while he accused me of faking. A nurse entered, smiling when she saw I was awake. She checked the monitors, made notes on a tablet, and promised the doctor would be in soon. She adjusted my pillows with gentle efficiency, treating my body with a care I was utterly unaccustomed to receiving. Dr. Winters arrived shortly after, a tall woman with kind eyes and an air of quiet confidence. "Good to see you awake, Abigail," she said, picking up my chart. "You gave us quite a scare." She explained what had happened in medical terms that nonetheless painted a terrifying picture. A deep vein thrombosis, a blood clot, had formed in my right leg, likely due to prolonged inactivity during my recent move and job search. Pieces of this clot had broken off and traveled through my bloodstream to my lungs, blocking pulmonary arteries and preventing proper oxygenation of my blood. "The technical term is pulmonary embolism, or P," she said. "Yours was significant, blocking several major vessels. Your right lung was almost completely compromised and your left was struggling to compensate." She didn't sugarcoat the severity. "Your condition was critical when you arrived. Your oxygen levels were dangerously low and your heart was straining to pump blood through blocked vessels. Without immediate intervention, the outcome would have been fatal." Fatal? The word hung in the air between us, cold and heavy. I had been dying, and no one in my family except Jessica had believed me until it was almost too late. "We performed a catheter-directed thrombolysis to break up the largest clots," Dr. Winters continued. "You will need to remain on blood thinners for at least 6 months, possibly longer. We will monitor you closely for any complications or recurrence." She reviewed the treatment plan, the medications I would need, the follow-up appointments that would become part of my routine. Throughout her explanation, she addressed me directly, taking my questions seriously, validating my concerns. The contrast between her approach and my family's years of dismissal was stark and painfully clear. After she left, Jessica filled in the gaps in my memory, explaining what had happened after I lost consciousness in the ambulance. "Dad followed us to the hospital," she said. "He looked like a ghost, Abby. When the doctor came out and told us how serious it was, that you might not make it, he just sat down on the floor, right there in the middle of the waiting room. Grandmother finally made him get in a chair. She described how he had paced the waiting room all night, refusing food or comfort, speaking only to ask for updates on my condition. Aunt Martha left after the first hour," Jessica continued, a hint of anger in her voice. "Said she couldn't handle the stress. Uncle Robert stayed, though. He made sure Dad ate something and called the rest of the family to update them." The news that my father had shown genuine concern was both surprising and confusing. My emotions about him were a tangled mess. Relief at his worry competing with anger at his absolute dismissal of my symptoms. "He's here now, actually," Jessica added hesitantly. "In the cafeteria. He's barely left the hospital. Do you want to see him?" I wasn't ready for that conversation. "Not yet." I shook my head and Jessica didn't push. She understood, better than anyone, the complicated feelings I harbored toward our father. Throughout the day, nurses came and went, checking vitals, administering medications, asking about my pain levels, and treating them seriously when I answered honestly. One nurse spent nearly 10 minutes explaining how the pain medication worked and encouraging me to ask for more if I needed it, assuring me that reporting pain was not weakness, but necessary information for my treatment. "Many patients, especially women, underreport pain," she told me. "They've been conditioned to think they should tough it out, or that they're not really hurting as badly as they think. But pain is important information that helps us treat you properly." Her words struck a chord so deep I had to turn away to hide sudden, stinging tears. My entire life, I had been taught that expressing pain was weakness, that my perceptions of my own body were unreliable and dramatic. Here was a medical professional telling me exactly the opposite, validating the very experiences my family had trained me to doubt. Later that afternoon, Jessica brought my phone, which was filled with messages from friends who had heard about my hospitalization. Elaine had texted hourly, increasingly frantic when I didn't respond, culminating in a message saying she was driving down from the city the next day to see me. My college roommate, my former coworkers, even casual acquaintances had reached out with concern and well wishes. Their messages formed a stark contrast to my family's years of dismissal. These people, some of whom I had known for only a short time, believed me without question when Jessica told them I was seriously ill. The door to my hospital room opened, pulling me from these reflections. My father stood in the doorway, looking smaller, somehow diminished by worry and what might have been guilt. Jessica squeezed my hand and discreetly left, giving us privacy for what would inevitably be a difficult conversation. Dad approached the bed cautiously, his eyes taking in the monitors, the 4 lines, the hospital apparatus that testified to the severity of my condition. "Abigail," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "How are you feeling?" "Better," I answered, simply, unsure what else to say. He nodded, then stood awkwardly at my bedside, hands shoved in his pockets. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations and apologies. "The doctor says you're going to be okay," he finally said. "That's good news." I nodded, waiting for more, for some acknowledgement of what had happened, of his role in delaying my treatment. But he only shifted uncomfortably, commenting on the hospital food, the weather, anything but the elephant in the room. After a few minutes of this strange small talk, he excused himself, promising to return later. As he reached the door, he paused, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm glad you're all right," he said. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with the beeping monitors and the weight of everything left unsaid. A week into my hospital stay, Dr. Winters suggested a family meeting. My condition had stabilized, and I was being prepared for discharge in another day or 2. She felt it was important for my family to understand the severity of what had happened and the care I would need during recovery. "Pulmonary embolism is not just a one-time emergency," she explained to me beforehand. "It requires ongoing treatment and lifestyle adjustments. Your family needs to understand that this is serious and that your symptoms should never be dismissed. The unspoken subtext was clear. She had pieced together from comments Jessica had made, and perhaps from my own reluctance to have my family visit, that their dismissal of my symptoms had nearly cost me my life. This meeting was her way of ensuring it would not happen again. My father arrived first, followed by Jessica and grandmother Marshall. To my surprise, Uncle Robert came as well, along with Aunt Martha, who had not visited since that first night. They arranged themselves awkwardly around my hospital room, no one quite meeting my eyes. Dr. Winters began by outlining what had happened in clear, unemotional terms. She explained how the blood clots had formed, how they had traveled to my lungs, and how they had blocked the vessels that carried oxygen to my blood. When Abigail arrived at the emergency room, she said, her gaze sweeping across my family members, her oxygen saturation was critically low. Her heart was racing, trying to compensate for the lack of oxygen, putting additional strain on an already compromised system. In medical terms, she was in acute cardiopulmonary distress. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. To be perfectly clear, without immediate medical intervention, Abigail would have died. We're talking about a matter of hours, possibly less. The room was silent, except for a small sound from my grandmother, something between a gasp and a sigh. The early symptoms of pulmonary embolism can be subtle, Dr. Winters continued. Fatigue, shortness of breath, chest pain that worsens with deep breaths. These might be mistaken for other conditions, but they should never be ignored or dismissed. Her emphasis on the word dismissed was slight, but unmistakable. My father shifted in his seat, his discomfort evident. How are we supposed to know? He finally asked, a defensive edge to his voice. We're not doctors. Dr. Winters regarded him steadily. You were not expected to diagnose her condition, Mr. Marshall. But when someone says they cannot breathe, believing them is a good first step. Seeking medical attention promptly can make the difference between life and death in cases like this. The rebuke, though professional in tone, was clear. My father looked away, his jaw tight. As Dr. Winters concluded her explanation and opened the floor for questions, a strange calm settled over me. For years, I had suppressed my feelings about how my family treated me, swallowing hurt and anger in the name of keeping peace. But sitting in that hospital bed, with the evidence of their dismissal laid bare in stark medical terms, something shifted inside me. I told you I couldn't breathe, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I told all of you, and you said I was faking. The room went still. My family's discomfort palpable. Dad cleared his throat, but said nothing. This was not the first time, I continued, gaining momentum. My whole life, every time I was sick or hurt, you told me I was being dramatic. You taught me to ignore my own body, to doubt my own experiences. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. Do you know what it is like to grow up never being believed? To be in pain and be told it's all in your head? To gasp for air and be accused of putting on a show? Now, Abigail. Aunt Martha began, her tone the same one she had used to scold me as a child. No one could have known this was serious. You have always been sensitive. I nearly died. I cut her off, my voice rising, raw with indignation. The doctor just told you I would have died without treatment, and you are still making excuses. Aunt Martha's face flushed, her mouth opening and closing without sound. She stood abruptly and walked out of the room, the door swinging shut behind her. Dad sat rigid in his chair, his expression a complex mix of anger and what might have been shame. We're not mind readers, Abigail, he said, but the usual authority was missing from his voice. How were we supposed to know this time was different? You weren't supposed to know, I replied. You were supposed to believe me every time. That's what parents do. They believe their children when they say they're hurting. The words hung in the air between us. Decades of dismissed pain distilled into one simple, undeniable truth. Dad stood up, his movements stiff, and walked to the window, staring out at the hospital parking lot. The silence stretched until Grandmother Marshall spoke up, her voice thin but clear. She's right, Frank. We failed her. I failed her too. Dad didn't turn around, but his shoulders tensed at her words. When Sarah died, Grandmother continued, referring to my mother, you shut down. You couldn't handle the children's pain on top of your own, so you taught them not to show it. That was wrong. Jessica, who had been quiet until now, reached for my hand. I've been keeping track, she said softly. Every time Abby was sick and no one believed her. Every time she was hurting and got told to tough it out, I wrote it all down. She pulled a small notebook from her purse, its cover worn from years of use. The migraine when she was 13 that turned out to be a serious infection. The sprained ankle you made her walk on for 3 days before getting an x-ray. The time she had strep throat and you sent her to school anyway. With each example, the tension in the room grew palpable. Uncle Robert shook his head, looking genuinely distressed. I had no idea it was this consistent, he said. I noticed sometimes, but I didn't realize how often. It wasn't your responsibility, I told him. But it was Dad's, and he chose not to believe me, over and over again. Dad turned from the window, his face unreadable. I did what I thought was best, he said. I was trying to teach you to be strong. You taught me to doubt myself instead, I replied. And it almost killed me. He had no answer for that. After a long moment, he walked out of the room without another word, the door closing softly behind him. The remaining family members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Grandmother sighed deeply, the sound carrying the weight of regret. He'll come around, she said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. He just needs time to process. I don't know if I can wait for that, I admitted. I can't keep pretending everything is okay. Not after this. You shouldn't have to, Jessica agreed, surprising me with her sudden firmness. None of this was your fault, Abby. You deserve better. Uncle Robert nodded. I should have said something sooner, he said. All those times I saw how they treated you, I should have spoken up. I'm sorry, Abigail. His apology, the first any family member had offered, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you, I managed, the simple acknowledgement more healing than I would have expected. As they left a while later, Jessica promised to return that evening. Grandmother kissed my forehead, whispering an apology of her own, and Uncle Robert squeezed my hand, his expression troubled but kind. Alone in my hospital room, I felt emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. For the first time, I had spoken my truth without minimizing it or making excuses for those who had hurt me. The family had fractured along new lines, those who could acknowledge the wrong that had been done, and those who could not face it. I wasn't naive enough to think one confrontation would heal decades of damage. My father might never fully admit his role in what happened, and Aunt Martha would likely continue to rewrite history to absolve herself of guilt. But something fundamental had shifted. I had found my voice, and I would not be silenced again. That evening, Elaine arrived from the city, bursting into my room with a weekend bag and tears in her eyes. She hugged me carefully, mindful of the 4 lines, then sat on the edge of the bed, demanding the full story. I told her everything, from the early symptoms I had ignored to the confrontation with my family. She listened without interruption, her expression shifting from concern to anger to relief. I always knew your family was messed up, she said when I finished. But this takes it to a whole new level. They could have killed you with their denial. Her righteous anger on my behalf was validating in a way few things had been. Elaine had always believed me, had never questioned when I said I was unwell, had never accused me of exaggeration or drama. What are you going to do now? She asked. You cannot go back to living with your dad. It was a question I had been avoiding, but one that desperately needed an answer. The prospect of returning to the apartment above my father's garage, of navigating the fractured family dynamics while still physically vulnerable, was overwhelming. I don't know, I admitted. I can't afford my own place yet. Not until I find a job. Then you'll come back with me, Elaine declared, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. My roommate moved out last month, remember? The second bedroom is just sitting there empty. Her offer opened a door I had not dared to consider, a way back to the independence I had reluctantly surrendered when I lost my job, back to a place where I was believed and respected. Are you sure? I asked, hope rising despite my attempts to temper it. Absolutely, she replied. Just focus on getting better. We'll figure out the rest. As we talked into the evening, making plans for my recovery and eventual return to the city, I felt a sense of possibility that had been missing since I moved back home. This health crisis, as terrifying as it had been, had forced a reckoning that was long overdue. It had shown me who truly cared for me and who was willing to face uncomfortable truths. More importantly, it had reminded me to trust myself, to believe my own experiences even when others questioned them. That lesson, painful as it had been to learn, might have saved my life. 2 months after my near-fatal pulmonary embolism, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, preparing tea as sunlight streamed through the windows. The place was small but bright, a second-floor walk-up in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Jessica had moved in with me, taking the second bedroom after securing a transfer to a hospital nearby. My physical recovery had been slower than I anticipated. The first weeks were marked by overwhelming fatigue, persistent chest pain, and the constant vigilance required by my medication regimen. Blood thinners meant monitoring for unusual bruising or bleeding. Every twinge in my chest brought fear of another clot. Each follow-up appointment carried the anxiety of potentially bad news. But gradually, my body healed. My lung function improved. My energy returned in small increments, and the fear receded enough to allow normal life to resume. I found a job as a virtual marketing assistant, allowing me to work from home while I continued to recover. The pay was less than my previous position, but it covered my share of rent and utilities, and the flexibility accommodated my frequent medical appointments. My relationship with my family remained complicated. Dad had made awkward attempts at reconciliation, sending text messages asking about my health, offering financial help. I politely declined. We spoke on the phone occasionally, conversations that carefully avoided any mention of the past. He never explicitly apologized for dismissing my symptoms, but he no longer questioned when I mentioned feeling unwell. Aunt Martha and I had no contact at all. She had sent a generic get-well card to the hospital with no personal message, and neither of us had reached out since. The silence between us was a relief, an acknowledgement that some relationships were too damaged to salvage. Grandmother Marshall called weekly, our conversations more open and honest than they had ever been. She had begun therapy herself, seeking to understand the family patterns that had led to such harmful dynamics. "I should have protected you more," she told me once. I saw what was happening and said nothing. That stops now. Uncle Robert had become an unexpected ally, visiting often and making a point of asking genuinely about my health and well-being. He had confronted Dad about his treatment of me, causing a rift between them that had yet to heal. But the most profound change was within myself. I had stopped second-guessing my own experiences. When my body signaled pain or illness, I listened without the filter of doubt that had been instilled in me. I no longer waited until symptoms became unbearable before seeking help. I had learned, at great cost, that my perceptions were valid, my pain real, my needs legitimate. One Tuesday morning, I ran into Dad at the grocery store. An unexpected encounter that left us both momentarily speechless in the produce section. He looked older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. "Abigail," he said finally. "You look well." "I'm getting there," I replied, the awkwardness between us palpable. He shifted from one foot to the other, examining an apple with unnecessary attention. "Jessica says your new job is going well." "It is. The company wants to make it permanent next month." He nodded, seeming genuinely pleased. "That's good. Real good." We stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by strangers selecting fruits and vegetables. The ordinary backdrop highlighting the extraordinary tension between us. "I've been thinking," he said, finally setting the apple down, "about what happened, about all of it." "I was wrong," he continued, the words clearly difficult for him. "Not just about the embolism, about a lot of things. The way I raised you after your mother died, I thought I was teaching you to be tough. I didn't realize I was teaching you that your feelings didn't matter." It was not quite an apology, but it was more acknowledgement than he had ever offered before. I nodded, accepting his words without rushing to absolve him of guilt. "I'm still angry," I told him. "Honestly, I might be for a long time, but I appreciate you saying that." He accepted this with a nod of his own. "Maybe we could have dinner sometime. You and Jessica both. When you're ready." "Maybe," I agreed, not committing but not refusing outright. "I'll think about it." We parted awkwardly, but something had shifted. A door had been cracked open, allowing the possibility of a different kind of relationship in the future, one built on honesty rather than denial. Back at the apartment, I found Jessica fresh from a night shift, drinking coffee at the kitchen counter. I told her about the encounter with Dad, and she listened thoughtfully. "Do you think he really gets it?" she asked when I finished. "Part of it," I replied, "maybe as much as he's capable of right now." A few weeks later, Jessica experienced a health scare of her own, unusual abdominal pain that had her doubled over one evening. Without hesitation, I drove her to the emergency room, insisting on a thorough examination, despite her protests that it was probably nothing serious. The diagnosis was appendicitis, caught early enough to prevent rupture. As I sat by her hospital bed after her surgery, I realized we had broken the cycle. We had not dismissed her pain or waited until it became critical. We had acted promptly, trusting her body's warning signals. The pattern established by our father would end with us. One evening in early fall, I received a surprising phone call from Aunt Martha. Her voice was uncharacteristically subdued as she asked how I was feeling. "I've been seeing someone," she said after we exchanged awkward pleasantries. "A therapist?" She suggested I reach out to you. I remained silent, giving her neither encouragement nor rejection. "I said some terrible things that day," she continued. "When you were sick, and before that too, over the years. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The apology was unexpected and oddly disarming. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, unsure what else to add. "Your mother would be ashamed of how we treated you," she said, her voice catching. She never would have allowed it. The mention of my mother, rarely discussed in our family, caught me off guard. "I barely remember her," I admitted. "She was a fierce advocate for her children," Aunt Martha said. "She would have believed you always." After we hung up, I sat with that new knowledge. That piece of my mother I had never known. Perhaps her advocacy had lived on in me, in my eventual refusal to be dismissed, in my insistence on being heard. As autumn deepened, my life settled into new patterns. Weekly therapy sessions helped me process the medical trauma and family dynamics. Monthly checkups confirmed my continued recovery. Daily walks built my strength and endurance. The fear of another pulmonary embolism never completely disappeared, but it receded enough to allow joy and normal activities to fill my days. One Saturday, at a local coffee shop, I overheard a young woman at the next table describing symptoms to her friend, symptoms her family had dismissed as anxiety or exaggeration. The familiarity of her story drew me in, and before I could reconsider, I found myself turning toward her. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, but I couldn't help overhearing. "Please get those symptoms checked out, even if no one believes you." I briefly shared my story, watching her expression shift from surprise to recognition. "I thought maybe I was overreacting," she admitted. "Trust yourself," I told her. "You know your body better than anyone else. And if your doctor dismisses you, find another one who will listen." As I walked home afterward, I reflected on how far I had come from that 4th of July when I had gasped for breath on my father's kitchen floor. The journey had been painful, the lessons hard-won. But I had emerged with something precious, the unshakable knowledge that my experiences were real, my perceptions valid, my voice worth hearing. The pulmonary embolism had nearly taken my life. But in surviving it, I had found a kind of freedom I had never known before. The freedom to trust myself completely. No dismissal, no doubt, no criticism could shake that foundation now. And in that trust, I had found not just healing, but strength.